G'day, Asia Mahara here. On my last video about rumination, a couple things. Just want to respond to a couple comments, or part of one comment and another comment. Rumination is still wholly negative, even when people are perhaps ruminating about the good, and more importantly, the too good to be true of it all, with a relationship with somebody who's now your ex, or it's on, off, but falling apart and not working. Because people with untreated BPD, as I've said in other videos, it's relational impossibility. So even if you're focused on and over-focused on what was good, what's that mean, right? Among other things I've said before. It means that you are focused in the past, ruminating about the past. Rumination is not really ever positive. And so if you're ruminating in the past, or about the past, about how good things were versus how bad things were, it's still not going to be very helpful, and it's still going to be as difficult, and it's still going to be increasing your suffering. And so then, one of the comments, or part of a comment on that video, was also, person said more, and then they said, I miss what could have been. Well, okay, so focusing and over-focusing on what was good, and more to the point, what was perceived to be good, felt good, seemed good, but wasn't really consistently what you thought it was, or the person wasn't really who you thought they were. So that's the past now, but you're still, working through it. Lots of people are, even after extended periods of time. Everybody's different. So then the statement, I miss what could have been, is projective, right? Projecting into a future that can't be. Because the relationship that was ended. So what does that really mean? Missing what could have, what could have been. Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. I think it's important people think about this, because if you are missing what could have been, you're going from focus on the good or the bad and rumination about the past to projecting into a future that isn't going to happen with that person, or what could have been, whatever that might mean. And then, so what about the here and now? And more to the point, what people with codependency are doing with this often, if you're in this situation, whether it's the rumination in the past, whether it's good or bad, about what's past now, and or you're missing what could have been, well, you're anywhere but in the here and now. And more to the point, you're not with you. You're not with yourself. And this is a really difficult people. Really difficult thing for people to, because there's a lack of acceptance, not of how they treated you, but of what happened aside from that, because that's another piece. That's more difficult, right? We never can justify that. But the responsibility of each person with codependency to really work on the acceptance that it's over. And that means grief, inner child work, self-differentiation, family of origin work, and all kinds of other pieces that are part of that puzzle. And anything short of that, some people report rumination gets better over time, but it doesn't usually happen by itself. And so if you're focused on the past, whether that past is a day ago, an hour ago, or 2 years or 4 years or 10 years ago, the good or the bad of it all, or you're missing what could have been. What about you right now in the here and now? So that becomes another obfuscation of people with codependencies taking responsibility. And I don't think it's a conscious thing that people do with codependency. So let me think a little bit more and try to expand a little bit more on this. I miss what could have been. Because really, if you think about it, and if you've ever had this feeling, how could you miss what could have been when you didn't even have what you thought was? What could possibly come out of what was but really wasn't that could have been that you could be missing right now? See how deeply entrenched people get in making sure, as a protective mechanism within codependency, not always conscious, making sure that you, if it fits for you, I just mean general you, if you are working that hard against yourself and the path that you need to take forward, that you're that uncomfortable, as most people with codependency are to some degree or other, at one point or other, in their beginning or wherever you might be in your process. So uncomfortable with looking at self, afraid to look at self, afraid to look at one's own responsibility for how did you get into the relationship, what happened, not your fault, not you couldn't have known. I'm not saying that, right? But there's another element, like I've always said, it's multi-layered, why and how people with codependency get into these relationships where somebody healthier doesn't have that emotional hunger and thirst for that idealization or love bombing, whether it's BPD or NPD, whatever you want to call it. So missing what could have been. I'm sure, and no disrespect to the commenter, I think that is just another subconscious way that people might focus like into a future that couldn't be, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it might be an emotional feeling, so it doesn't have to make sense. Again, though, it's avoidance of self, avoidance of one's own work, and what will really help you to heal and get on that journey moving forward. And how do you move forward if you're still ruminating, whether you're ruminating about the good times or the not so good times? Rumination is not positive. There's thinking, journaling about, self-reflection, but rumination is not positive. And missing what could have been. What could have possibly become of that? So it's sort of like a past and a projection to the future that is obfuscating the view of the now and what's really going on. And what I would say to you about that is that trying that hard, whether you're aware of it consciously or not, you need to get aware of it consciously if you're in that space. Trying that hard to avoid your here and now. And yes, it's massive difficulty to shift from the focus on the X. I understand that. But I think some people, like for so many people with codependency, the only way out of that is to do the inner child healing work. There's just no other way around it. And what is doing the inner child healing work about? Well, it's about really working with someone and focusing on you. And people with codependency are not comfortable with that. And I have lots of clients who are just, maybe in the beginning of, like after a lot of work, maybe at the beginning of accepting that they realize more that they still have difficulty with focusing on themselves. But they also realize the benefit as we proceed in the process. So missing what could have been is just really, I don't want to say delusion, but it's an illusion. Because nothing can come from that which doesn't exist. Nothing can come from that which does not work out. Nothing can come from anything that isn't continuing in the sense of missing what could have been. But lots, and then some, personal growth, healing, recovery, learning how to relate in a healthier way than the codependent relational style and the repetition compulsions and the dysfunctional relationship to and with self that entails. Lots of personal growth, healing, lessons, and further understanding of yourself. And more to the point, really getting to know yourself fully in a way where you will be more bounded going forward in your life with self-esteem and self-worth. That's a lot that can come out of the pain and what you're going through right now, perhaps still, and wherever people are at. But nothing can be missed. I guess there's a feeling component to that. But to say one is missing what could have been, there's no way anything could have been. Because if it could have been, then why isn't it being right now? So it's tricky, and a lot of people with codependency, and I'm not saying you're doing this consciously, subconsciously, getting in your own way with what you're focusing on and understanding how that's in your way and that it's not helping you. So avoiding suffering about one thing versus facing self and healing what needs to be healed and felt there, you're just putting yourself between a different kind of a rock and a hard place than you were actually in when you were with the person with BPD. So missing what could have been. I suppose that might come out of a feeling of longing and missing the person sort of in the past tense of, they're gone, it's over, maybe you haven't accepted it, but I don't know what happened still, all of that. But to miss what could have been, it needs to be based on something. It's kind of like someone who passes away at a really young age. People might have that sentiment about missing what could have been as they developed more, went through more of life. But I don't know about how one can really say you can miss what could have been when a relationship is ruptured, broken, over, whichever way it ends. And make no mistake about it, in untreated people with BPD, as I said in a video I did recently, the minute the relationship starts, it begins to end. It's the repetition compulsions of people with BPD untreated. BPD becomes largely, no matter what else you call it, becomes a real relational impairment. And with that, people with codependency have a different kind of relational impairment to self, and especially after these relationships. You likely did prior, but it wasn't maybe as difficult and then some as it is now. But you have an impaired and maybe even a more impaired relationship dysfunctionally to and with yourself right now because you're still negating yourself. So, I don't know, I hope that's food for thought for somebody. But I think it's really important that people with codependency, if you haven't yet accepted it's over, if you haven't yet started to work with somebody to learn, skills and tools and practice them to stop the rumination, that's a way of hanging on too. And that hanging on is a way of still being in your own way to the direction you really need to take and the journey that you really need to take. And people with codependency, many, not all, have a real hard time accepting that personal responsibility specifically. That you need to put yourself first. It's like anathema to people with codependency that they should deserve to be put first. That's why going no contact and getting into treatment and therapy and help, support. That's why it's so crucial that you do that. Because until and unless you do that and you embrace that, so hard for people with codependency to want to, or to know how to, or to not be afraid to embrace discovering more about long-standing inner child woundedness and what really hurts down deep that people continue to think is all about the ex. And it isn't all about the ex. Take care.